There is something that happens usually at night when the house is quiet and the day has finally stopped asking things of you. A memory surfaces not because you called for it, but because it was always there, just beneath the noise. And for a moment it feels so close. A summer afternoon from years ago. The sound of something familiar. A place you used to know. And with it comes this feeling. This soft, aching feeling that things were somehow better then, that the air was warmer, that time moved differently. Most of us know this feeling. It comes quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in like a change in the light. And suddenly you're somewhere else. Or at least part of you is. Part of you is back in a kitchen that no longer exists. Or on a street you haven't walked down in years, or in a moment so ordinary that you can't quite understand why it still feels so precious. This feeling has a name, nostalgia, and it is one of the most human things there is. But here it's something worth thinking about slowly. Late at night, when there's no rush to reach a conclusion. The past you're missing may not be quite what you think it is. Not because your memories are wrong exactly, but because memory does something to the past. Something gentle and invisible. It edits. It softens. It keeps certain things and quietly sets others aside. And so what you're reaching for when nostalgia visits you, that warm, golden version of before, is real in its way. It's just not quite the same as what actually happened. Understanding that doesn't make the feeling smaller. If anything, it makes it more interesting. Because it turns out that nostalgia and memory and the way the past seems to glow, these aren't bugs in how we think. They're something closer to features. They serve a purpose. And understanding that purpose, slowly and without any particular urgency, is a kind of comfort in itself. There's a thought that almost everyone carries without quite examining it. The thought is simply, things used to be better. It doesn't always appear as a full sentence. Sometimes it's just a feeling when you see a photograph from 20 years ago and, notice how easy everyone looks, how loose and unhurried. Or when you hear a song that takes you back and the back that it takes you to feels warmer than where you are now. Or when you find something old, a letter, a ticket stub, a piece of clothing, and the weight of it surprises you. Not its physical weight. The other kind. There's something in that object. Not the object itself, but what surrounds it. A whole atmosphere of before. And before feels somehow lighter. This is not a new feeling. People throughout history have believed that earlier times were better. Ancient writers described golden ages that had passed. Grandparents speak of simpler days. Every generation seems to believe that the world was somehow cleaner and quieter and more manageable before their particular moment arrived. The Romans looked back at a more virtuous Rome that probably never quite existed. Medieval scholars mourned a classical world they had only read about. Victorians pined for an England that was more a painting than a place. The golden age, it seems, is always behind us, always just out of reach, always exactly far enough away that it can be remembered but not returned to. And maybe that distance is the whole point. Memory is not a recording. This is something that sounds simple but takes a while to really settle into. When we remember something, we're not playing back a file. We're reconstructing. We're taking fragments, images, feelings, smells, the texture of a particular afternoon, and assembling them into something coherent. And every time we do that, the reconstruction is slightly different. slightly shaped by who we are now, by what we need, by what we've felt since then. Think about a memory you've returned to many times, a holiday, a birthday, a summer that felt significant. You've probably told the story of it more than once, to different people, in different moods. And each time you tell it, you're not just reporting, you're also creating. You're deciding, without quite deciding, what goes in and what stays out. What tends to stay out is the boredom. This is one of the most significant things about memory. It compresses. It takes weeks or months and distills them into a handful of moments. Usually the moments with the most feeling attached to them. And so when you remember a summer from childhood, you're probably not remembering the days when nothing happened. The overcast Tuesdays, the afternoons that dragged, the small irritations and the waiting. Those days were there. They were probably most of it. But memory keeps moving past them, looking for the parts that meant something. What it finds mostly are the bright parts. The day it all came together, the afternoon that felt magical for reasons you couldn't explain, the moment of connection, the feeling of pure, uncomplicated ease. And so the memory that gets stored, the one you return to, is not a representative sample. It's a highlights reel. Unintentionally, naturally, the mind doing what it does. Pain is another thing memory softens. Not always, and not all kinds of pain. Some memories hold their weight for a long time, but the ordinary suffering of daily life, the low-grade friction of difficult years, the exhaustion and uncertainty and frustration, these tend to fade in ways that the joys don't. There's actually a phenomenon sometimes called fading affect bias, which is a phrase that sounds technical but describes something quite simple. Negative emotions attached to memories tend to fade faster than positive ones. The sting goes, the warmth lingers. So when you think back to a chapter of your life that felt hard while you were living it, maybe a year of uncertainty, or a period of change, or a stretch of time when things were unsettled, it's possible to remember it now with something closer to fondness, not because it wasn't hard, but because the hardness has become soft-edged. It has become a story, and you are still here to tell it. That transformation from difficult experience to story you survived does something. It makes the past feel like something you moved through rather than something that was moving through you. It creates a version of yourself that was going somewhere, even when it felt like you were standing still. And that version of the past, the one that's been softened and storied and kept at a distance, that's what nostalgia reaches for. Not just the good parts, but the whole thing, gently edited, given a kind of amber glow. Childhood is where nostalgia lives most comfortably. Even for people who didn't have particularly easy childhoods, there's often something about the early years that the mind returns to with a certain tenderness. Part of this is simply structure. In childhood, time worked differently. Not actually. The hours were the same length, the days the same count. But the experience of time was different. And that difference matters enormously. When you're young, everything is new. And novelty, it turns out, is what makes time feel long. When the brain encounters something unfamiliar, it pays attention. It records. It marks the moment. And that density of recording, that fullness of attention, is what makes a summer feel like a lifetime when you're 8 years old. By the time you're 30 or 40 or 50, so much of life has become familiar. The routes you take to get places you've been 1,000 times. The routines that carry you through weeks without you having to notice them. The patterns that have calcified into habit. The brain doesn't need to record these things anymore. It knows how they go. And so it moves past them, and weeks can pass without leaving much of an impression. And then you look back and the year feels short. But in childhood, almost everything was still new. The world was still being cataloged. Every summer contained discoveries. Every year brought things that had never happened before. Not just first days of school, but first friendships, first feelings, first understandings of how things worked. The brain was recording constantly, filling pages, building a library. And so looking back at childhood from adulthood, there is this impression of immensity. All those packed, full, dense, recorded days, all that world. It's not that childhood was actually longer, it's that it felt longer because it was fuller with the labor of encountering things for the first time. There's something else about early life that makes it glow in memory, and it's something almost nobody talks about directly, even though almost everyone feels it. When you're young, the future is abstract. In some sense that the future exists, that things will happen and time will pass and you will grow. But it doesn't press on you. It doesn't sit on your chest at night. It doesn't arrive in the form of decisions that need to be made today, right now, with real consequences. The future is just this large, undemanding thing in the distance that doesn't require anything from you yet. And so you can be entirely present, not in the meditative, disciplined way that people talk about now, but just naturally, easily, because there isn't much else competing. The present moment is what's available. The grass under your feet, the game you're playing, the sound of something in another room. These things are just the world, and the world is enough. Adults carry the future differently. It's close, it's specific, it has deadlines and weights and questions that don't answer themselves, and so the present is always slightly crowded. It's always being compared to a past you've left behind and measured against a future you haven't reached. The now can feel thin sometimes between those two larger things. And looking back at childhood from inside this crowded present, there's a kind of wistfulness for that earlier ease. Not necessarily for any specific thing about being young, but for that relationship with time, that uncrowded now. Responsibility is a strange thing. It grows so gradually that most people don't notice when it arrives. One day you're moving through life with a kind of freedom, and then slowly, without any announcement, the weight increases. More people depend on you. More things require your attention. The decisions multiply. The stakes feel higher. The margin for mistakes feels smaller. And this weight, even when it's carried willingly, even when the things causing it are things you chose in love, this weight changes how the present feels. It makes the present heavier, more complicated, more loud with competing demands. So when the mind drifts backward, it drifts toward lighter times. Not because those times were objectively superior, but because they didn't weigh as much. Or rather, because they weigh less now that they're over. Even a time that was genuinely difficult, a period of uncertainty, a stretch of life that was hard in real ways, can feel lighter in memory simply because it's done. It has an ending, It has a shape. It's been contained by time passing, and that containment makes it feel manageable. even if it wasn't at all manageable when you were inside it. The present doesn't have that. The present is still open, still unresolved, still waiting to find out how it ends. And that openness, that unresolvedness, this is part of what makes the past feel calmer than it was. The past is finished. It has edges. You survived it, and you know you survived it. And there is something deeply comforting about a thing that's done. Familiarity is its own kind of comfort. This is so obvious that it's easy to miss. When something is familiar, the brain doesn't have to work as hard. Familiar things are predictable, and predictability is restful. The brain can turn down its vigilance a little. It knows how this goes. It knows what to expect. This is why the same song can feel different from the 100th time than it did from the first. The first time you're tracking it, orienting, figuring out where it's going. The 100th time you already know, and no one lets you rest inside it instead of following it. This is why certain books are comforting to reread, even when you remember how they end. Why certain films feel like coming home. Why familiar food in a moment of stress can feel like a kind of kindness. The familiar doesn't surprise you, and there are moments when not being surprised is exactly what you need. Nostalgia operates on something like this principle. The past, specifically your past, the one you remember, is deeply familiar. You know how it goes. You've been through it, and revisiting it, even in memory, triggers that same restful quality. The brain recognizes where it is. It knows how the story ends, and so it can relax a little. The irony is that the past you're visiting in memory was probably not relaxing at the time. It probably had its own noise and uncertainty. But now, from here, it has the quality of the familiar. And familiar is restful, and restful is something you sometimes need very much. There is something particularly interesting about the nostalgia that people feel for things they didn't actually experience, for eras they weren't alive for places they've never been, for versions of the world that existed before them. Someone born in the 1990s might feel a pull toward the 1970s, toward its colors and textures, the way things looked and sounded, the particular quality of light in photographs from that time. Someone who grew up in a city might feel a longing for rural life they've only ever seen in pictures. Someone who has only ever known the present might look at black and white photographs and feel something that resembles missing a place they were never in. This kind of nostalgia has a name too, sometimes called anemoia, a longing for a time you never lived through. And it's worth wondering what's happening there. What is it you're actually missing when you miss something you never had? The answer might be simpler than it seems. What's missing isn't the era itself. It's the feeling that era represents. Slowness, texture, simplicity. A world that seemed to ask less, move less quickly, demand less attention. A world without the particular noise of right now. And so the pull toward any other time, even one you didn't experience, is really a pull toward a quality of life, a pace, a feeling, something that the present, for various reasons, doesn't quite provide. Memory in these cases isn't the mechanism at all. It's imagination. It's the mind constructing a past from fragments, photographs, stories, music, textures, and then longing for that constructed place, which is poignant and human and tells you something important about what people actually need. Simple things. There is a reason that simple, quiet, repetitive activities carry a particular kind of peace. Not the peace of resolution, not the satisfaction of having finished something complicated, but the peace of things being exactly as expected, of knowing what comes next, of the world for a moment being small enough to hold, walking the same path, tending to the same plants, cooking the same meal, doing something with your hands that doesn't require thought. These activities have a quality that's difficult to articulate, but immediately recognizable. They let the mind wander without getting lost. They occupy just enough attention to keep the noise down, without demanding so much that you can't also be somewhere else. Some quieter somewhere, some cooler part of yourself that the rest of the day doesn't often reach. This is perhaps why people in genuinely overwhelming times often reach for simple things. The person who, after an exhausting week, wants nothing more than to cook a meal from scratch. The one who, in a moment of grief, finds comfort in tidying. The impulse to return to something small and manageable, something that can actually be completed when everything else feels too large. Simplicity is not the absence of meaning. It's often the place where meaning can actually be felt, without the interference of complexity, without the noise of too many variables, without the sense of being outpaced. There is a kind of world that many people find themselves drawn to, almost without understanding why, when they're tired or overwhelmed or simply in need of something gentler. A world that is small, that operates on clear, simple rules, that rewards patience and repetition, that contains things like wood and stone and water and grass. A world where the primary concerns are things like building a shelter, or planting seeds, or watching the sun move across a blocky sky. These worlds, virtual worlds, game worlds, have something in common with nostalgia. They offer a version of life that has been simplified, that has had the complexity removed, that lets you do things with your hands, even if your hands are just pressing buttons, and see those things directly, immediately cause something in the world in front of you. There is no ambient noise about what you should be doing instead. No emails arriving, no one waiting, no decisions with real-world consequences. Just the simple fact of being somewhere and doing something, and that something mattering inside its own gentle logic. People often describe these experiences with words that sound like they're describing a memory. Peaceful, simple, like going back to something, even when the game is new, even when they've never played it before, even when the world they're entering has never existed. This is interesting. Why would something new feel like a return? Part of the answer might be that what these worlds offer isn't a return to a specific place or time. It's a return to a specific feeling. The feeling of things being comprehensible, of the world being small enough to understand, of your actions having clear and immediate effects, of not being outpaced. In the world of daily life, cause and effect are often separated by enormous distances. You make a decision today and you don't know for months or years whether it was the right one. You work hard and the results are delayed, uncertain, mixed with so many other variables that it's almost impossible to feel the direct connection between effort and outcome. The world is large and complicated and doesn't always respond clearly in a simple, quiet virtual world. You place a block and the block is there. You plant a seed and eventually something grows. You build a wall and the wall keeps what's outside from getting in. The world responds to you clearly and immediately and without ambiguity. This clarity is something people miss without knowing they miss it. It's something that childhood sometimes had, when the tasks were smaller and the feedback was faster, when the games had obvious rules and obvious outcomes, when the distance between doing and understanding what you'd done was short. So even a player who has never experienced a simpler time in real life can feel nostalgia inside a world that offers simplicity. Because the nostalgia isn't really for a when, it's for a how. A way of being in the world that the present, for 1,000 reasons, often forecloses. The night sky is simple in a way that the daytime isn't. Not because it contains fewer things, it contains more, in a sense, all those unreachable distances. But because it doesn't ask anything, it just is. It has been there for longer than any human concern, and it will be there after all human concerns have quieted. And it doesn't care about your deadlines or your decisions or the things you haven't done yet. Looking at the night sky, really looking for a moment without reaching for your phone, can produce a feeling similar to what nostalgia produces. A kind of stepping outside of your own moment. A sense of scale that makes the immediate feel less urgent. A quality of quiet. This is what the past offers in its way. It's behind you. It's already resolved. It doesn't need anything from you. You can look at it the way you look at the night sky, with interest, with something like wonder, without being asked to respond. And that quality, that not being asked, is rare and precious. Most things ask. The present asks constantly. The future asks even more. But the past, except for the way it sometimes sends echoes, mostly just waits. Mostly just is what it was. And there is something restful about that. Something that makes it want to be returned to, again and again. There is a phrase that captures part of this. The past is a foreign country. It's a borrowed phrase and an old one, but it holds something true. The past is a place you can visit but cannot stay. Cannot even really visit, except in the strange tourism of memory. You can look at photographs of it. You can listen to its music. You can read its words, but you cannot go back. And perhaps the impossibility is part of what makes it golden. The things we cannot have often become more beautiful the further they recede. The fact that a door is closed makes you more curious about what's on the other side. If you could actually return to any day from your past, any particular afternoon, any ordinary Tuesday, it might not feel the way you expected. The details you forgot would be back. The boredom, the discomfort, the uncertainty you carried then. The things that were hard in ways you've since stopped remembering, but you can't go back. And so you're left with a memory, and the memory, as we've been circling around slowly, isn't a recording. It's an impression, a feeling, a color, and color is something you can miss. The particular warmth of something that was. Not because the thing itself was perfect, but because it was yours, and it was then, and then is over, and now is not. There's a kind of grief and nostalgia that doesn't get named often enough. Not grief for a person or a loss that can be pointed to, but grief for time itself, for the simple fact that things pass, that you can only be any version of yourself once, and then that version is gone. That the afternoon you're living right now, whatever Tuesday this is, whatever this particular quality of light, is happening only once, and someday you might miss it. This thought, late at night, has a specific quality. It's not entirely sad. It's not entirely beautiful. It's both, in the way that most real things are both. The philosopher in you, the part that surfaces at night when the house is quiet, might notice that the nostalgia you feel for the past is almost exactly like the nostalgia you could, right now, feel for the present. This moment, the one you're in, the way things are right now. Because right now is already becoming the past. It is on its way to being the thing you look back on. And knowing that changes the feeling slightly. It doesn't make it easier exactly, but it makes it more honest. The past wasn't a different kind of time. It was just the present from before. And the present someday will be the past you miss. People carry versions of themselves, the way houses carry old layers of paint. Beneath who you are now is who you were 10 years ago, still there, still legible if you press gently. And beneath that is who you were before that. And so on, all the way down to early layers that you can barely remember, soft, half-formed, unfinished. Nostalgia sometimes feels like those layers pressing up from below, like a memory of an earlier self that's still somehow present, not demanding anything, just there, reminding you that you have been other things, been in other places, lived through other versions of life. There's a kind of company in that. Even alone, late at night, you carry all of that with you. All those past selves, all those previous rooms and seasons and versions of what it felt like to be you. It's a crowd, in a way. A quiet, unintrusive crowd. Not asking anything. Just being present in the way that background things are present. The idea that the present is harder than the past sometimes comes from a real place. And it's worth sitting with that for a moment without immediately softening it. There are real ways in which the world has become more demanding. More information arrives every day than any previous generation had to process. More choices exist. More possibilities. Which sounds like a good thing, and is in certain ways. But more possibilities also means more chances to choose wrong. More paths you didn't take. More versions of your life that exist somewhere in theory and nowhere in practice. And the pace. The sense that things are moving faster, that change comes before you've adjusted to the last change, that keeping up requires a constant effort that previous versions of life didn't quite require in the same way. These are real things, not just impressions. And it makes sense that inside all of this, the mind would reach backward, would look for times that had fewer channels, fewer decisions, fewer voices arriving from all directions at once. This reaching isn't weakness. It's a reasonable response to an unreasonable amount. It's the mind looking for a moment to put something down. Sleep, in a way, is its own kind of past. Every night, you leave the present for somewhere else. Somewhere your conscious self doesn't quite follow. Somewhere that doesn't require your opinions or your decisions or your engagement with the ongoing narrative of your life. And every morning, you return from that place, carrying whatever it left with you, which is often nothing you can name. This is why the edge of sleep feels the way it feels, the world getting quieter, the thoughts getting slower, the grip of the present loosening, not because anything has been resolved, but because you're moving toward a place where resolution isn't the point. The feeling of drifting towards sleep has something in common with nostalgia. Both involve letting go. Both involve moving from a place that's loud and demanding to a place that's quieter and less requiring. Both involve a kind of surrender that isn't defeat, just the natural release of tension that's been held all day. There is a specific feeling that comes sometimes in the late evening when you're doing something quiet and ordinary. Washing a dish, sitting near a window, watching something that doesn't need your full attention. A feeling that's hard to locate, somewhere between sadness and contentment. Not quite either, but shaded by both. This feeling doesn't always have a name. Sometimes people call it wistfulness. Sometimes they call it nostalgia, even when there isn't a specific memory attached. Sometimes it's just a quality of the evening itself, arriving without much context, tinting everything slightly amber. This feeling, as far as anyone can tell, is very old. It might be as old as consciousness itself. The capacity to know that time is passing, to feel the difference between before and now, to carry the past inside you and sometimes have it surface. It doesn't need to be fixed. It doesn't need to be explained away. It's just part of what it is to have lived long enough to have a past worth missing. There's something quietly philosophical about where nostalgia actually lives. It's not in the past. The past is over, inaccessible, existing only in physical objects and in the changes it made to the world and to you. Nostalgia isn't in the past, it's in the present. It's a present tense feeling about a past tense time, which means that when you're missing something that's gone, you're actually experiencing it in a way. Not the original thing, but something real, something happening right now that the original thing made possible. The memory is a present tense creation, built from materials that no longer exist as they were. And the emotion it carries, that warmth, that gentle ache, that's entirely real right now in you. There's something almost generous about that. The past keeps giving. Long after it's over, long after the specific details have blurred, it keeps offering these moments, these surfacings of something warm, these reminders that things mattered, that you were there, that time passed through you and left something behind. The present moment, if you could really be inside it, fully, without the past pulling from one side and the future pulling from the other, is actually quite small. Quite manageable, quite enough. The breath moving in, the weight of the body resting, the sound of whatever quiet sounds are in the room, the temperature of the air, the particular darkness of this particular night. These things are present. They are here. They're not asking anything. They're not going anywhere yet. There will be time later for everything that needs to be dealt with. There always seems to be time for that. The demands will still be there. The future will still arrive. Nothing will be lost by letting it wait for a little while. And the past, the soft, edited, amber-lit past, will also still be there. It's not going anywhere either. It's more permanent than the present, in a way. Fixed, complete. Always the same length when you look back at it. Always the same shape. You can return to it anytime you need to. The door to it is always open. And it will always be there, warm and familiar, without asking you to do anything at all except remember. It's worth thinking slowly about what happens when we idealize something. When we take a time or a place or a person and make them golden in our minds. What that process does and why we do it. Part of it is certainly the editing that memory does, the smoothing of edges, the fading of difficulty, but part of it might also be something more intentional, even if unintentional. A kind of choosing. A decision made below the level of awareness to find in the past something that the present lacks. If the present feels complicated, the past becomes simple. If the present feels loud, the past becomes quiet. If the present feels uncertain, the past becomes known. The past becomes whatever the present most needs it to be. And in this way, nostalgia is creative. It's not just remembering, it's constructing, making something usable from materials you already have, building a shelter from what you know. This doesn't make it false, it makes it more interesting. The past you remember is a collaboration between what actually happened and who you are now. Between then and here, it's a meeting place. People sometimes worry that nostalgia is unhealthy, that it means you're unable to appreciate the present, that it's a form of avoidance. And this might be true sometimes. There are ways of using nostalgia that do keep you from the present. Constant comparison, the belief that things can only get worse, the refusal to find meaning in what's here. But most nostalgia isn't like that. Most nostalgia is gentle. It surfaces, it's felt, and then it retreats. Like weather. Like so many things, it's the extremes that cause difficulty. The ordinary version is just part of the texture of life. The ordinary version of nostalgia is simply the mind doing what minds do, connecting past to present, finding continuity, reminding you that you have a history, that you are not just who you are in this moment, but also who you were in all the previous moments still. That continuity is something. It's a thread. It means that the person lying here right now has been many places, known many things, lived through many days that seemed at the time like they would never end. And all of those days are still here in some form, still accessible, still part of what made this particular person lying here thinking these particular thoughts. There's a kind of peace that comes with accepting that the past is not something to be recovered, not a place to get back to, not a standard against which the present perpetually fails, but simply a part of the story that's already been told. The chapters are finished, the pages don't change, no better or worse in the end than what? No better or worse in the end than what came before and after, just different. And different times feel different, not just because the circumstances are different, but because you were different. The person in those memories isn't quite you, not the you here now. It's a version of you from before, a younger draft, someone who had less of the story, but more of a certain kind of openness, a certain kind of unknowing that looks from here like freedom. You can miss that person. It's reasonable to miss that person. They were real, and they were you, and they're gone in the way that all selves become gone as they're replaced by the next version. But they're also still here, in everything they built, in every habit and fear and love they left in you, in the way you respond to certain music or certain light or certain smells that trigger something from back then. The past is always inside the present. They're not separate. The border between them is just time, moving in one direction slowly without pause. Somewhere right now there is someone going through something that will one day be their nostalgia, living inside a chapter that later they will look back on with warmth. The chapter they're in right now, the one that probably feels ordinary, perhaps difficult, perhaps too long or too uncertain. This chapter will someday have the amber light. It happens to every time. Every era of a life gets the golden treatment eventually. The years of financial struggle become the years of freedom. the time before the children become the years of simplicity. The difficult job becomes the experience that taught you everything. The uncertainty, looking back, becomes the time when anything still felt possible. Every time of your life is a future nostalgia, already becoming the thing you'll miss. This is not something to be sad about. It's actually almost funny, in a gentle way, that we move through the golden age while it's happening, seeing only the gray parts, and only later see the gold. But it's also an invitation, if a very soft and undemanding one, to notice what's here, not to be grateful in some prescribed way, not to perform appreciation, but just to register, to be occasionally aware that this, whatever this is the one you have, the one that's going, the one you'll later find warm traces of in unexpected places. The quietness of a world like Minecraft, the particular quietness of placing blocks, exploring caves, building something slowly, watching a day-night cycle move through its simple repetitions. This quietness is not accidental. It's built into the thing. The world is designed to be manageable, to be paced, to let you be bigger than it for once, instead of the other way around. In real life, the world is much bigger than you. Decisions ripple outward in ways you can't track. Other people's choices affect your life in ways you didn't choose. Events occur that have nothing to do with you and reshape everything you're a part of. The world runs on its own logic, mostly indifferent to yours. But in small virtual worlds, you are the most important thing in them. The world responds to you. It keeps track of what you've done. It holds on to what you built. It is, in a quiet and unpretentious way, entirely about your presence. This is something children have naturally that adults often lose. The sense of being at the center of their own story. Not in a self-absorbed way, but in a fundamental way. The sense that your experiences are the main ones, that the world is organized around your encounter with it. Adulthood involves learning necessarily that this is not quite true. That the world is large and you are small, and your experience is one of an enormous number of experiences happening simultaneously. This is true, but it can also be exhausting to carry, and so sometimes, for a while, it's good to be somewhere small, somewhere that keeps track of you, somewhere that holds what you make and doesn't let it disappear. There is something in repetition that the modern world doesn't give much room to. The modern world tends to equate repetition with stagnation, newness with progress, variety with richness. The assumption everywhere is that more is better, more stimulation, more options, more novelty, more change. But the nervous system doesn't always agree with this assumption. The nervous system at its depths wants patterns, wants rhythms, wants to know what comes next. Not always, novelty has its pleasures too. But there's a level below the level of what we consciously want, where the predictable is deeply welcome. This is why lullabies work. Not because they're complex, they're not. Because they repeat. Because the brain quickly learns the pattern and then can rest inside it. Because knowing what comes next means you can stop bracing for the unknown. The repetitive quality of quiet gameplay, or of rain on a window, or of a familiar piece of music, works on something similar. The brain orients quickly, recognizes the pattern, and then settles. And in that settling, something releases. Some held tension, some watching for what happens next. What happens next is the same thing. That's what makes us safe. It's not that the past was better, Let's hold that thought gently for a moment. It's that the past is done, and done is easier than ongoing. The past has been edited by memory into something more coherent than it was. The past contains versions of you who were younger and less tired and not yet carrying everything you carry now. The past didn't know what it was just happening, day by day, like now was just happening. But from here, it looks like it knew. It looks like it had shape. It looks like it was going somewhere. That's the perspective. That's the vantage point that makes before look better than now. Now, you're inside it. And from inside, nothing has shape. Nothing looks like it knows where it's going. That's what now feels like. It always feels like this. It always has. The past felt like this too, when it was the present. You just can't feel that anymore. You can only feel where you are. And where you are is also going to be somewhere you look back at. Also going to be edited. Also going to have its amber light. Already becoming a memory. Already beginning the slow process of simplification that will eventually make it look, to whoever you are then, like a gentler time. Maybe that's the thing worth holding on to on a quiet night when nostalgia is doing its gentle work. Not that things were better, but that they were. That all those times existed. That they are part of what made this. All of it. The summers you remember, the rooms you lived in, the people you knew in earlier versions, the ordinary Tuesdays that passed without leaving much trace, the difficult stretches and the easy stretches and the long stretches of nothing much. All of it was real. All of it happened in the actual world, with actual light and actual air and actual people. All of it was the present once, and it passed. The way everything passes. Not because something went wrong, but because that's what time does. It moves. It carries things forward. It takes what was and turns it into what is, and then turns what is into what was over and over without hurry, without pause, and you are somewhere in that movement right now. In the middle of it, like you've always been. Like you'll be as long as you're here to be anywhere. There's a particular quality of late night thinking that doesn't happen at other times of day. The thoughts come slower, with more space between them. They don't insist on conclusions. They're willing to circle around a thing without landing anywhere specific. They're patient in the way that most daytime thinking isn't. This kind of thinking is its own kind of rest. Not sleep, but a gentler wakefulness. A mode in which the mind is doing something but nothing it does has consequences. Nothing had to go anywhere. Nothing has to produce anything. The thoughts about the past that come at night are like this. They surface, they're felt, they move on. They don't need to be resolved or understood or acted upon. They're just what the mind does when it's let loose from the urgency of the day. And there's something right about letting them be that. Not trying to conclude anything about them. Not deciding what they mean. Just feeling what they feel like. And then letting them dissolve back into wherever they came from. The past doesn't need your conclusions. It's fine without them. It's just there. The way it's always been, not going anywhere, not asking anything. There are sounds that carry memory the way light carries color. A song from a specific time. The particular noise of a ceiling fan in a room you slept in years ago. The sound of a screen door. Rain falling on leaves. A specific timbre of laughter that reminds you of someone from before. These sounds arrive without warning sometimes, and they bring the whole atmosphere with them. Not just a memory, but an entire feeling. The temperature of a particular time. The quality of air from a place you haven't been in years. The emotional weather of a whole chapter of life, compressed into a few seconds of recognition. This is one of the more quietly extraordinary things about being human. That so much can be stored. That a sound or a smell or a slant of light can reach directly into something that seemed inaccessible, can open a door that you didn't know was there, can put you for a moment somewhere that no longer exists. It doesn't last long. The moment passes, the present reasserts itself, and you're back. But for that brief interval, you were in two places at once, here and there, now and then, and both were real. What we call the present is actually very thin, a razor's edge between what's already happened and what hasn't happened yet. Everything on either side of that edge is, in some sense, absence. The past is gone. The future hasn't arrived. There's only this sliver of now, always moving, always becoming the past, even as it's being lived. This sounds, on a certain kind of night, like it should be troubling. Such a narrow thing to be standing on. But it isn't quite. Because the past, even though it's gone, has left its traces in everything. In the state of the world, in the people you know, in the habits and memories and reflexes that are woven through you. The past is gone, but it's also everywhere, embedded in the present, invisible, but everywhere. And the future, though it hasn't arrived, is already prepared for. The seeds of it are in what's happening now. What you're part of now is shaping what comes. You can't see it yet, but it's there, growing in the direction of now. So the present, thin as it is, holds more than itself. It holds all of before and all of the possible afters. It's very full, actually, for something so small. The longing for simplicity might be the most honest thing about nostalgia. Underneath the specific memories, underneath the golden light and the particular faces and the remembered sounds, underneath all of that is just a wish for things to be simpler than they are. Simpler in the sense of clearer, fewer moving parts, more manageable. A life that can be understood by the person living it. This wish is not naive. It doesn't mean not understanding that complexity is real, that life is difficult, that growth involves complication. It just means that sometimes underneath the understanding, there is a quieter part that wants to put everything down for a while, that wants to be in a small room where everything is visible and nothing is too much. Nostalgia offers a version of that, a way of visiting a place where things were, if not actually simpler, at least remembered as simpler. A retreat for a few minutes into something smaller and more manageable. And that retreat is okay. It's not avoidance, exactly. It's more like breathing. The breath goes in, the breath goes out. You're in the present, and then briefly you're in the past, and then you're back. And the back and forth doesn't mean you're not committed to where you are. It just means you're human. Something happens in the mind when it's left with nothing urgent to do. When the day is over and the obligations have quieted and there's no next thing requiring itself to be done. The mind, freed from task, tends to wander, and more often than not, it wanders toward the past. This might be structural. The past is a known quantity. The future is uncertain, and wandering toward it in imagination can be anxious, or at least energizing, requiring thought and planning. But the past requires nothing. It's already there. You can walk around in it, look at things, revisit what you know. It's a bit like having a room you can return to whenever you want. Nothing in it changes, everything is where it was. You don't have to do anything there. You can just be there for a while. This is what the mind seeks, sometimes, at the end of a long day. Not a solution or a plan or even comfort exactly. Just somewhere to be that isn't here temporarily. Somewhere that doesn't ask for anything. The houses we grew up in, the streets we walked without knowing we were making memories, the particular way light came through windows in rooms we'll never see again. These things exist now only in the people who were there, and in the objects that were kept, and in the small ways they shaped who you are. This is the archaeology of a life. Every person is a living archive of places they've been and things they've experienced. Most of it inaccessible to anyone else, private, carried alone. And sometimes at night, you take a small tour of that archive. Not looking for anything, not trying to learn anything from it, just walking through, noticing what's there, letting it be what it is. This tour is its own activity, not productive in any measurable way, but not pointless either. It's the mind doing one of the things minds do, tending to experience, making sure it's still there, acknowledging that it happened. One of the quieter joys available to a person is recognizing that they have survived everything that seemed unsurvivable, every hard stretch that felt permanent, every uncertainty that felt endless, every change that felt like too much. All of that, and you're still here, still moving, still having these slow, late-night thoughts. The past is evidence of this. All those difficult chapters that are now finished, all those long seasons that eventually ended. The proof in your own personal history that things don't last in their worst forms. That time has a way of moving, even when you can't feel it moving. This is not quite the same as optimism. It's something quieter, more grounded, less about the future being good and more about the past being survivable, which it has been so far, which it keeps being, and there's a peace in that. A specific kind of peace that doesn't come from everything being okay right now, but from knowing that you have some history of things being okay eventually. A track record, not perfect, not without cost, but enough to keep going on. The feeling of nostalgia, the feeling of missing something that was, is also a feeling of having had something, of having experienced something that mattered enough to miss. There's an implied gratitude in it, even when it doesn't feel grateful, even when it feels like loss, because you can only miss what you had. And having is something, even if the having is over. This is not a small thing. To have had anything that's worth missing, a time, a place, a person, a version of yourself, is already a kind of richness. The missing is the price, but the thing was real. The thing existed. You were there for it. And wherever you are now, that's still true. You were there for it. It was yours. And it still is, in the way that all past things become permanently yours, sealed into the past, unchangeable, forever having happened. The mind settles at a certain point, not all at once, and not dramatically, just gradually. The thoughts slow down. The spaces between them get longer. The grip on the particular concerns of the day loosens, and what remains is something simpler, something more like background, more like the sound of the house being quiet. This settling is not resolution. Nothing has been figured out. The questions that were there before are still there. They'll be there tomorrow. when the day starts again and the world picks up its pace. But for now, they're at a distance, and distance is restful. The past is there too, at a distance. All the previous selves, all the previous rooms, all the accumulated days. Not pressing, not demanding, just present in the way that background things are present. Felt without being examined, there without being the point. And the present, this particular late night moment, this quietness, this particular quality of rest, this is also accumulating. Also becoming the past slowly, moment by moment. Also on its way to being something that's done and finished and softened by time. Also on its way to being someday something warm to return to. Everything moves in one direction. Everything eventually becomes memory. And memory keeps some of it, softens what was hard, makes the whole thing seem, from a distance, a little golden. That's just what time does. It's not a consolation. It's not a promise that things will be better. It's just the way the story works. Every chapter becomes an earlier chapter. Every present becomes a past. Every hard season becomes the season that was. And none of it is lost. Not really. Not the way things are truly lost. It stays in you in the way that all experience stays. Changed, softened, accessed differently than it was lived, but still there. Still there. The sound the night makes when everything is quiet is not quite silence. There are small things in it. The particular nothing of a house at rest. The distance between one thought and the next. The gentle weight of being somewhere without needing to be anywhere else. This is enough right now. This is the whole of what's required. The day was what it was. The memories are what they are. The past is where it is. And here in this quiet, there is nothing to settle or resolve or understand. There is only the dark and the quiet and the slow drift towards somewhere simpler than waking. The breath comes in, the breath goes out. Somewhere a long time ago, there was an ordinary afternoon that felt like nothing. And somewhere, a long time ago, that afternoon was you. The same you just earlier. Just before all the things that came after. Standing in some room, looking at something, not knowing that the moment was building itself into a memory that would, one day, on a night like this, surface quietly and feel like something worth returning to. And here it is. Still here. Still warm. Still yours. The world keeps building itself into something. Every day, every hour, every unremarkable moment that passes without you noticing. All of it accumulating into the story that later you'll call your life. The story with the amber light. The one that, from a distance, will look more intentional than it felt. More directed, more shaped. Right now, you're inside it. Inside the making of it. And that's what makes it feel complicated and uncertain and sometimes too much. Because you're inside and you can't see the shape. But the shape is there. It's forming. And someday, from wherever you are then, you'll be able to see the outline of this particular chapter. The one that's happening right now. The one you can't quite see. It'll look like all the other chapters look. From outside, smaller than it felt inside. Softer. With the difficult parts gentled, and the good parts caught in something like light. This chapter too. This one too. There's nothing to do with all of this. Nothing to apply, nothing to resolve, nothing to carry into tomorrow as a plan. These are just thoughts that a quiet night makes possible. Thoughts that the daytime is too loud to hear. They don't need to go anywhere. They can just be what they are. Slow movements of the mind through familiar territory. The past that lives in you, the present that you're in, the future that hasn't arrived and isn't asking for you yet. All of it, just for now, at a comfortable distance. The world is still out there, doing what it does, moving at its pace, carrying all its complexity. It will still be there when you come back to it. It doesn't need you right now, and you don't need it. Right now, there's only this quiet, this dark, this particular feeling of being somewhere between one day and the next.